Welcome to the Fierce Kind Mama of Multiples podcast. This podcast is for anyone expecting or currently raising multiples, twins, triplets, or more. I speak to inspiring parents of multiples who have healed from unexpected pregnancies and birthing experiences and who candidly share the highs and lows of raising multiples. I also speak to the professionals that work with multiple birth families. Together, we cover the practicalities of raising more than one baby at a time, as well as enhancing the emotional well-being of caregivers and children alike. Come join us as we laugh, cry, and share our personal and professional wisdom on all things multiples. I am your host, Dr. Christina Kvetsa, and I am a fierce kind mama of multiples. On today's episode, I speak with Dr. Joan Friedman. Joan is an identical twin and mother of 5 children, including fraternal twins. She is a psychotherapist and a definitive expert on twin development. She is the author of 3 books: Emotionally Healthy Twins, A New Philosophy for Parenting 2 Unique Children, The Same But Different, How Twins Can Live, Love, and Learn to Be Individuals, and Twins in Session, Case Histories in Treating Twinship Issues. She has spoken to and consulted with culturally diverse groups of twins from around the world. Dr. Friedman's work focuses on issues that adult twins confront as they adjust to life as singletons after having been raised as twins. On today's episode, she shares her unique personal and professional experience and offers many useful tips to parents of twins. I hope you enjoy this episode. So I'd love to welcome on today's episode, Dr. Joan Friedman. Welcome, Joan. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Christina. I feel very honored that you've invited me to do this podcast on twins. And I am very highly qualified to be talking, I believe. I'm an identical twin and I'm the mom of 5. And the last ones are fraternal twin boys who are now 34. So you can imagine they're old and I've been through a lot with all of my kids, which has been great experience. I started on this journey being an identical twin and struggling in my therapy, finding out my identity and trying to work through a lot of twin issues. And then when I had my sons, Johnny and David, who were my last of 5 children, thank goodness I was an experienced mom, I thought that I just got really interested. And then I wrote Emotionally Healthy Twins, which is my first book, because I had this sort of idea that, well, I have 2 more kids. I'm not going to be sleeping for, another year. It's going to be the same thing. But it actually turned out to be so different, because what was so different with the singletons is that I had a sense of mastery over myself, over them, and the connection just kind of, and the attachment kind of evolved, given the fact that I was just dealing on a one-to-one basis with each of them. Well, that certainly did not happen with Johnny and David, which I had sort of assumed it would, but it was, in hindsight, I don't know why I did, because it didn't happen. And actually, that was the catalyst for writing the book, is that I was thinking about what is the attachment when you have to attach to 2 babies at one time, and what are some of the struggles and what are some of the strategies and tips that I've learned from my own work, as a twin and also as a parent of twin, to try to really help other parents think about the importance of attaching to each baby as an individual, but from very early on, right from the very beginning, as opposed to doing it. I get calls from moms of twins that are, 6 or 26, 86, and there's always issues that come up. And I realized that so much of that might have been mitigated had they had parents who were enlightened to how important it is to talk about the individuality, to make the single attachments as early on as you can.
Wow, Joan, just listening to your experience I feel very humbled and honored to actually be in your presence, because I know that you've written a number of books. You've written 3 books, I believe, on twinship issues and supporting multiple birth families. So I know you have a wealth of knowledge and experience professionally, but also just hearing you speak about your own personal experience and the richness that has brought. And I guess also the knowledge and the personal experience you have as a twin yourself and as a mother to twins. I think that's really invaluable. I'd love to hear more about, I'm loving what you're saying about the attachment. I found myself as a mother of twins, and I'm also a psychologist, I was very acutely aware from the beginning of the fact that my boys had to share me from the beginning and what that meant for them and their development, and the competition that I sometimes see, issues around, fairness, needing to have things exactly the same. Not that I need that, but that they want that and they ask for that, and trying to negotiate and navigate that. I'd love for you to speak more about some of these issues.
Well, you've read my mind, because these are the very salient points that I try to talk about in my book. It is really, really hard for twins to have to share everything, especially their mom and dad's time and attention and love. And it's very hard for parents to give individual attention, because there's always somebody, on the other, over your shoulder, looking and needing for something. And that's kind of what I figured out very early on. And so what I did was, just from the time they were born, I would take each one of them out whenever I could. Like if I was driving the other kids to school, I put one in the car. If I had to go to the market, I took one with me. If I had time, I took one to the park. I never wanted them to sort of have the experience I had, which was always being known and identified as a twin. I mean, they are fraternal, so they didn't look alike, like my sister and I did. But I mean, I spent so much of my life not having any one individual actually knowing me. So I started to talk to the groups of parents about alone time and how important it is. And the idea that you will take time to spend with each child, and every situation is different. Some people don't have childcare. It's easier said than done. All the moms I talk to go, we want to get away ourselves. We don't want to spend alone time. We want to get away, which of course I understood too. But once they started doing it, after I had to convince them that I was not causing a trauma in the twin bond, they started to say, oh my God, this is so wonderful. It's so nice to be alone. There's no fighting. We can go to better restaurants. I mean, they really started to see it as a gift that they were giving to themselves as well as giving to their children. And see, it sounds so simple, but yet it's so complicated for many people, because they do have this stereotypic belief that if you separate the twins too much or too early, they're going to be traumatized. So they always say, well, the 2-year-old's crying, I'm leaving with one. I said, well, of course the 2-year-old's crying. They're not crying because you're wresting their twin away. They're crying because you've left them as a toddler. So many parents are reluctant to kind of see that it's about the attachment that we're trying to develop, not trying to traumatize them. And they often think that instead of seeing separation as fortifying the twin bond, they see it as breaking it. There's a wonderful saying by this woman in London. She's an English psychoanalyst who's done a lot with twins, Vivienne Lewin. And she said, this is how it sums it up for me. Twinship is a comforting bond. It's not a developmental bond. And in recognizing it that way, when I see many adult twins who have been raised by one another, they're surrogate parents for one another, because for many complicated reasons, their parents were not involved in their growing up. And you can imagine, as a psychologist, you can understand it. As a psychoanalyst, I know that without this very important attachment early on, so many of these twins have grown up without having the opportunity to develop a sense of themselves. So it seems like a simple message, but I have so much trouble getting it across to people. So I'm appreciative of this time that you're giving me in order to sort of, preach about it, because it's so misunderstood that the alone time is the capacity to form an attachment with each baby.
That's wonderful. And I think that, I'm so appreciative of you speaking about it, because I think sometimes what I think maybe happens, I don't know if this is your experience or if you would agree with this, but I'm wondering if sometimes parents confuse the bond between the twins with the bond with the caregiver, as if that could be a replacement if the caregiver, say, can't, tend to each baby, to each child all the time, that, oh, well, they'll be all right because they have each other.
And in many ways, it's wonderful that they do have each other. However, go ahead. It's not the way that internalized selves get developed.
Yes, right? It doesn't replace the attachment that's required with a caregiver. So we as parents really have to be mindful of that. And I think step in and, address it early. What would you say? I know you've done a lot of work with twins in your practice, so as a psychoanalyst, and you've worked with families that have twins, so multiple birth families. What are some of the, common, if you like, or the things that you keep seeing people come to treatment for?
Well, are we talking about adult twins coming to treatment or parents calling me for help with some parenting issues with twins? Because it's very
different. I imagine it is different. I'd love for you to speak about both if you could, so you treat adult twins in your practice and you also work sometimes with families.
I have a huge range of adult twins that I work with, and it's been so fascinating and so rewarding for me. People can't find somebody who works specifically with twins, and people want a person who understands what it's like to grow up as a twin. And so to try to cut this very short, I would say that the biggest problem that adult twins have when they reach me is that one or the other has found a romantic partner and thus has broken the twin bond in the sense of how they both felt about it growing up. And it's very difficult because the one that feels entitled to have a romantic partner is met with a tremendous amount of rage and sadness and a sense of betrayal and abandonment by her twin or by his twin. Men go through the same things, surprisingly. So what has to happen is the twin who wants the relationship has to be able to work through this idea that she's entitled to it, even though it's hurting the person that she loves the most in the world. And it's such a complicated thing. I mean, nobody thinks about if you have a sibling, you could be jealous or whatever if your sibling gets married or something and you're not, but you don't go to this exaggerated extremes of feelings that make it so hard for you to leave your twin to go and make an attachment with an outside person. So I would say that that's really the breaking point of many adult twins, even adolescent twins, young adult twins, older twins. It's an ongoing problem that requires a lot of help and understanding. And it's really like twins are not accustomed to being selfish. They work together to maintain an equilibrium. So if you're going to have your own romantic partner, all of a sudden you have to believe that you're entitled to be selfish or selfless, whatever way you want to put it. And it's a very hard lesson to learn if you've spent, 20 odd years being this equal partner with your twin sister or brother. So that's always a big and important and interesting conundrum to work through. And that also points to what happens, what do I see a lot with families with younger twins? And it's exactly what you brought up before, the feeling that parents feel compelled to give each twin a fair and equal life. I mean, in the realm of things, it's absurd. Nobody has a fair or equal life. Nobody does. But poor parents of twins, confronted every minute. It's not fair. It's not fair. And having to deal with this thing in their relationship makes it so hard for parents to confront this because it requires two very specific things. I just spoke in Mexico City and this mom was listening to my talk and she goes, oh, I've done everything wrong. I count the number of chips in each of their lunch so they both get the same number of chips. And I've heard this before, but it's a metaphorical example of how if you don't make things equal for your children, how bad you feel as a parent, even though you really may not realize that you're doing the worst, sending the worst possible message to your children, because as they grow up, we can guarantee that their lives will not be the same, nor will they be fair, nor will they be equal. So having already the potato chips having to be the exact amount is tantamount to really not helping them face a lot of issues that twins have to face. Lots of times I've been told stories. My daughter, the coach doesn't let my daughter go to the next soccer level because her sister didn't make it. Or my one twin made it to the higher gymnastics level, but they won't pass her because her twin isn't there yet. This is such a complicated emotional conundrum for parents. How do we deal with that ambivalence? How are we empathic with the twin who suffers or who may not get what the other one has? And how do we, at the same time, celebrate the successes of the one who's achieved something? But think about if we don't do that. Think about if we just dismiss all of that and make it mush and make it the same and not deal within ourselves how difficult that is, how we end up, really harming our children to feel as if they can't be and do and have what they deserve or what they've earned or what they'd like to have. So the fair and equal question, as you bring up, is a very, very big one. For
Absolutely.
smaller twins, yeah.
For smaller twins and for
older twins.
And for older twins, yeah.
It's just sort of is it unfair to have 5 potato chips or to have a boyfriend? But I mean, in the end, it's kind of the same thing.
Yes, absolutely. And when you were speaking, I was reminded of a recent incident that happened for me personally with my boys, where I had made them lunch. It was a sandwich and one of them ate his and the other one hadn't even touched his, but we were needing to go somewhere. So I got them in the car and I just brought the sandwich with us for the child that hadn't yet finished his lunch. And when we got in the car, I remember the child who had finished his lunch said, "Where's my sandwich? I need a sandwich." And I said, what do you mean? You've already eaten it. I've already made it for you. And you had it before we got in the car. It's not fair. My brother has one. So it's not fair. And he actually used that word, but that's not fair. I want a sandwich too. And I remember, having this moment where it was like, well, I can't give that to you now. Like, we've done, lunch is done. You've had your, but it felt it's such a trivial example, but I think it highlights so much the sense that, I need to be equal. I need to have exactly. And I don't, I'm not someone who does count the chips or anything, but I think they do. They sit there and they eyeball it and they look at it and say, he has more. And, I find that this is an ongoing struggle. So I'm wondering, what do we do, as parents to encourage the individual children, the twins, to say, well, it doesn't really matter, or it can't be the same. This isn't as huge of an issue as I'm making it. How do we, especially when they're young, they don't have a sense of what. Of course. Yeah.
All they have is trying to make everything equal. So yes. It was great what you said, which is, I'm sorry, you've already eaten, but your brother hasn't eaten. This is his sandwich. Well, why don't I get another one? Because you ate yours already. So, you ate yours, he's having his now, that's just kind of the way it is. I mean, you just have to sort of, I think, talk about the reality of the situation. So you can say, I'm sorry, it may not seem fair, but it is fair in the end because you've already eaten and he didn't. And then you just leave it. You don't get into a big discussion with them. But it's a beautiful example. And they're doing that, as you say, with everything. And so if you're keyed into everything that they say about that stuff, and then you actually do something about it to try to make it fair, it's an ongoing problem because they will expect this with everything in their lives. So you're right. But parents have to be comfortable recognizing the inequality. Things aren't fair. This is that is that. And if you're a new parent and you've never done this before and they're screaming at you and you're feeling guilty about something, what do? Oh, okay.
You give in.
It's easy.
Yeah.
Because it's easier and you're tired and you don't know the right thing to do. And sometimes you'll give in and sometimes you won't, of course, depending upon all the external circumstances. But I think if parents really understood the psychology behind the importance of not doing that, maybe more often than not, they would just give the children the feeling and the thought that they're okay with this being different, and they hope they can be okay with the differences too. Because that's so hard. The differences make twins feel that they're not the same. And twins often feel like they should and have to be the same. And when you highlight differences, it can cause tension between the twins, but they have to be able to get used to that. And especially fraternal twins get used to that a little bit early, because they're very different usually. They look differently, and they don't often have the same, skills and personalities. But with identicals, it's much more of a struggle because they are so similar in so many ways.
Hi there, fierce kind mama. Are you expecting multiples and wondering how you're going to cope when the babies arrive? Or do you already have multiples at home and wonder, will this ever get easier? First of all, let me say loud and clear, I get it. Feeling overwhelmed in motherhood is really common, and us mothers of multiples are particularly prone to feeling sometimes like it's all too much. I know for myself that becoming a first-time mother to twins at the age of 40 was a huge adjustment, physically and psychologically. So I've taken my years of training in mental health and my experience coaching mothers of multiples and put together a guide with my 5 top tips for overcoming overwhelm as a multiple birth parent. This guide is free, of course, and it doesn't matter what age multiples you have. You may be pregnant, or your multiples might have already left home. The principles apply to all parents of multiples. And because I know you're short on time, I've broken down the tips into easy-to-read chunks that you can begin implementing straight away. You can get your free copy now by signing up at my website, fiercekindmama.com. And I think, that importance too, that you were speaking about around acknowledging the discomfort. So acknowledging that the discomfort the twins might have when things don't seem fair, but also as parents that we need to acknowledge the discomfort that's coming up for us around not being able to provide the exact environment or the exact items or, things that the conditions that the twins are asking for. So it's really incumbent upon us, I think, as parents to learn to sit with some of that discomfort more.
Yeah, and I think if you recognize that discomfort is really a very important part of emotional health, that you could maybe do it a little bit easier, knowing that the payoff will come later on.
Playing the long game in some ways. Absolutely. I've heard you speak before on this dynamic, which I'd love for you to maybe spend a little bit of time talking about, which is between twins that can happen when one is a giver and one is the receiver, and the problems that can arise from that. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. Twins, even identical, do not have the same personality. So one will end up, more than likely, being a little bit more dominant than the other. I know moms of twins have told me that this switches roles often. I personally have never experienced that, but I know that a lot of moms say it switches. But the important thing is that in that dynamic, the caretaking twin, if he or she's in that role, is often the more dominant twin and will in some ways speak for the twin, boss the twin around, make decisions for both of them, and in some way, kind of usurp the personality of that other twin. I mean, not meaning to, but it just dynamically, that's what happens. And then the caretaker twin, I mean, I see this when I work with adult twins who've suffered so much with this dynamic. It's so incredibly huge in terms of what happens. But for little ones, so the caretaker, the one who's being cared for, who seems in that moment less assertive, less dominant, ends up sort of losing a sense of his or herself because she's accommodating the more dominant twin in order for the two of them to get along and make decisions and go ahead and not fight. And identical twins, especially identical twin girls, are very invested in keeping their relationship with a very important equilibrium. So they don't want to have a lot of conflict. So the conflicts gets minimized, mitigated a lot by one twin accommodating the other, to more or less a bad degree if it ends up being really exaggerated. So I think it's something that you'll see. To me, it makes sense. You aren't going to have two exact people with the same personality getting along. It's why we often marry our opposite or something, because it can't be the same. So being aware of that dynamic and making sure that the caretaking twin isn't speaking too much, isn't making it so difficult for the other twin to speak up, say what she thinks or what she feels, kind of, putting a wedge against that dynamic so that the caretaking twin doesn't so overshadow the other one that there's kind of this, ongoing pathological accommodation as they get older that's very unhealthy. A lot of times, if you see this, because a lot of people get confused and think that what the twins are doing in that situation is taking care of each other. And they get so blown away. Oh my God, they love each other. They take care of each other. They're so sweet. They never fight. All this bullshit that I call the twin mystique. And, it's fine if it's in small dosages, but people they want to see what they want to see. And they want to see that, these twins are, soulmates forever and they're best friends. And, this caretaking dynamic can really become out of whack and distorted if parents are seeing it only in that vein, that this is what they love and they love doing and love being together. And, if they don't watch for this idea where one is really overtaking the other and the other one's over accommodating the dominating twin so that there's no fighting, you have to really watch out for that. I'm not saying that it happens all the time. I have a very skewed idea of twinship because all I work with are problems. So, it's like someone asked me today, what are the positive parts of twinship? And I go, I don't know. I got to think about that because my brain and my work is so skewed toward issues and problems and challenges and development, which I love, but I'm not a great person to talk about. Oh, it's great having twins, even though it is. And most twins are fine. There's a very small percentage who are, kind of messed up the way I'm talking. So not to worry, but it's so interesting because you can learn so much by thinking and seeing what adult twin problems are. Then you can go back and really sort of help, parents of younger twins maybe think about stuff so those kinds of problems don't develop. Not that they will, but there's a chance that they might. But it's good to be aware. So yes, that's the caretaking, cared for dynamic, which can be lovely, but it's got to be assessed if it becomes really unhealthy. That's what I see is when that dyad has become so unhealthy and so skewed that when there's a tension or a break in the twinship, the cared for person breaks down and the caretaking person also breaks down because he or she has no function any longer. The function has been to take care of the twin. If he or she is no longer doing that, that function has been his entire soul and identity. And so if we take that function away, like if the cared for twin finally rebels and says, leave me alone, I'm sick of this, I want to be on my own, you're smothering me, it's the caretaker who suffers because there's been no development other than being a caretaking function other than in the twinship. And that's what happened to me. I was definitively a caretaking person, a function for my twin. And when she and I split up to go to different universities, I fell apart. She was fine, but I was not fine. And that, of course, I didn't learn any of this until years later, but I realized that I didn't have any sense of a self unless I could find somebody to take care of. So I did find probably the most depressed person at my college to take care of for a few years until I got healthy. But definitely what happened to me is that was my only way of feeling that there was any value, any self-worth, was that I could take care of somebody. And now I, parlayed it into a profession, but I'm much healthier now because I have a lot of other things going on. But that's probably the root of it. The root of people that come into be helping professions come from a sense of wanting to be caretakers, which is great.
Absolutely. And I think that, we often...
I'm sorry, it's a roundabout way of answering your question. So whatever.
No, it's a lovely, lovely response. And I think, we often don't come into our profession, especially psychologists, I think, by accident. I think it's Yeah, so I think it's great that you shared your personal struggles and how that has influenced the decisions that you've made along the way, but also the insight that it's given you in helping other twins and other multiple birth families.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved what you said about the dynamic and the caretaking role and how that kind of plays out, and I guess the need for us as parents to be quite attuned and mindful of all of this from very early on. And I know that, in your book, Emotionally Healthy Twins, A New Philosophy for Parenting Two Unique Children, that you do provide some practical guidelines for parents to really help their twins develop into the unique individuals that they are. And I'd love if you could speak a bit about that, some of your book and what you speak about in your book, the strategies that you offer and the guidance.
Well, the strategies are sort of, as we've talked about, sort of inside and outside. Inside is being able to readjust your thoughts and your feelings and your perceptions. But outside, again, this is part of my growing up. I always advise moms of twins to sing happy birthday twice and to have their own cakes, because my sister and I fought over everything. And also to give them, you can give them different presents. You don't have to give matching identical presents, because what happens is the twin who opens the present first ruins it for the other child. It sounds so simple, but it's something so important if you're a twin, to have somebody aware of what might be happening to you and to do something thoughtful and considerate about how this might affect you. I also have talked about getting a single stroller. I was always so clumsy. I never even used my double stroller. I just used the single stroller I had from the other kids. And being able to take one baby out in the world and not have everybody comment and who's older and who's talking first and who's bigger and all that stuff that moms of twins get bombarded with. Now, some moms of twins like it, and I understand, but I think after a point that when you like it so much, you're using your children as a narcissistic fulfillment for something, rather than really focusing on helping them be seen as two separate children. So the single stroller cuts out all of that situation where you have to answer any sort of questions about anything. Also, my boys didn't have their own room. I'm always asked about own rooms until our older son went to college. So they were 8. So they shared a room until they were 8 years old. And I was very cognizant about giving them both of them had their own drawers. So 2 drawers for Johnny, 2 drawers for David. And not that they knew anything really initially, but soon they began to see that there was something that was for them and something that was for the other one. And again, all that stuff helps them internalize that they're different and they're individual and they have some of their own things. Another thing which a lot of parents forget to do, which I understand, is they do not take pictures of the twins alone. One mother told me she had to have a soccer picture for one of her boys, and she had to rip up a picture because there were no pictures of each child by themselves. So to remember that, to remember also to take a picture of each child alone with mom and dad and maybe the other siblings. Even though I know the ones of them are so cute together, I put a picture of Johnny and David in different frames in their room by themselves. So they saw 2 different pictures. So they knew that they were two very individual kids, but they were called the twins, So there's little things like that, and also it's one thing in my book I talk about, which is you don't have to teach twins to share. They already share everything. So if you can get them a few toys and when they're a little bit older, you put their initials on them, they might have a ball or a truck or, some sort of toy that it only belongs to them. And they do not have to share that. And if their brother or sister asks about it, they can say, no, this is mine. Or if they want to share it, they can. Again, it's all about creating some external sort of atmosphere where they can recognize outside and then eventually inside that they are their own person. I mean, again, as you say, it's the long haul, but these things are very, interesting and important to think about. Also, one more thing, Christine, I'm sorry, is that play dates, friendships, and birthday parties. The calls I get is that twins are not able to make friends. They struggle. And it makes sense that they do. They go to preschool with a security blanket. They don't learn what all the other kids are learning. Because they don't have to, because they have a built-in friend. And by the time they get to latency age, which is like 7, 8, 9, where your friends are much more important than your parents contact me and go, Mike, they don't have any friends. They don't know how to make friends. They feel bad, or else they either share a friend and that doesn't work out for too long. So it's very important to educate other parents. Like Johnny and David were always in the same school, but always in different classes up till high school. So when they were in preschool and someone in Johnny's class had a birthday party, they would say, oh, do we need to invite David? No, absolutely not. This is not David's class. This is not David's friend. No, David has his own class. He's going to make his own friends. Please don't invite him. But thank you very much for asking, because they thought I was crazy, but whatever. But it's like being aware of stuff like that you start to build up this reality about being separate children. So if Johnny was invited, we would take David somewhere else. So yeah, he's not going, but you're going to be doing something else, something so they feel somewhat taken care of. But this is a big issue with twins making friends from all the calls that I get from parents. So again, it's something I want to talk about a lot that, again, needs to be known by parents early on. So they're aware of this and don't just use the twinship as, a substitute for really understanding the importance of learning how to make a friend. It's hard because twins love being together. They love playing together. It's like they have a kind of a seamless, thing going. They fight and then they're fine 2 seconds after. So it's, so parents think, well, why should I bother? They have each other. But so it's a tough one. But I like to talk about it because it doesn't dawn on most people to think that this could become a problem as they get older, and does.
Yes. Thank you so much for that insight you've provided and the practical strategies and the wisdom you've shared, because I think it is a huge issue. And speaking personally, we actually had this issue recently where my boys were deciding whether they wanted to be in the same class or not next year, because they started school last year and were in the same class. And then they were deciding amongst themselves whether they wanted to be in separate classes this year. And initially they said that they did. The teacher then had asked us to speak to them about that, just to make sure that they understood the implications of that decision. So I spoke about it with them and I said, for example, if one of you gets invited to a party and the other one doesn't, then how are we going to handle that? And the look of fear on their face when it was like, oh, I can't possibly do that. So I want to be together. And then I couldn't shift them from that decision. They were adamant that they wanted to be together after all, because the thought of being apart, making other friends and potentially missing out on a birthday party was just too much for them at that moment. So it was a hard call to make, but we just decided to keep them together another year to see how they go. And already one will go off at recess and lunch and play with other kids. So you can see that they do want that separateness. But I can imagine there's so much behind all of that, like not wanting to upset your co-twin, especially as the twins get older. And like all the things that you've spoken about, the betrayal or being in the caretaking role, all of that. I think there's just so much for us as parents to be mindful of.
And I think, what you did, I understand what you did, but had you called me, I would have said, don't ask them. They're not capable of making that kind of decision right now. I know once you ask them, you couldn't go back on it, but they're never going to say, when you try to do this next year, they'll go, no, we want to be together. And you're going to have to prepare them, if this is what you want to do, to say, no, we let you be together this year, but you're not going to be together next year. Mommy and daddy are making that decision, just so you know, and you get used to it. So, because you do kind of have to be that person that drives the wedge, because why would they want to do it? They don't want to do it. We understand why, but looking at the long-term implications, you have to do it and you have to be comfortable. You don't want to traumatize them, certainly. You know more about how separation, if it's not done properly, can be traumatizing. And so maybe they wouldn't have had time to be even prepared to be in different classes this year.
Yes.
But you need to do a lot of preparation for next year and let them know you and your husband are making this decision and they will be in separate classes. And it's not up to them. I mean, I'm a real hot with this stuff.
I love it, though. I love it. It's a great tip and great advice.
They're always going to say they want to be together. And of course, it makes sense. But if we're kind of coming from this idea that we know better why it may not be a good idea, then we got to put our foot down and say no. So.
I love that. Yes, I love that. And I think that it has been certainly a challenge, and I'm sure it is for many twins and multiple birth families, to find that separate time. That's been the biggest challenge for us, is they need to separate more. And I think that you've highlighted today the importance of that, the long-term implications of if we don't do that as parents and the problems that can arise. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience, personal and professional. I've so enjoyed this conversation with you today. It's been lovely having you on the show. And if you are inclined, I'd love to invite you back on to speak more, because I know you just have so much nuggets of information to provide for the audience. Thank you so much, Joan.
Really appreciate it. I hope I haven't turned everybody off with my very negative, bombastic approach, but this is just kind of who I am and what I do. So I appreciate you giving me this time and audience to share my insanity and my craziness about what I think. And I'd love to come back. It was a pleasure. It's absolutely pleasure.
Well, your craziness and insanity is definitely welcome here. We love it. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're so welcome. Take care. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you've heard, then please consider subscribing and leaving a review so that other expectant and current parents of multiples like yourself can find this podcast and the valuable information it contains. I would be so very grateful if you left a review and shared this with anyone you think could benefit from listening. If you have a particular topic you'd like me to cover on this podcast, feel free to reach out to me via my website, fiercekindmama.com, or connect with me on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Fierce Kind Mama of Multiples. New episodes are released every fortnight, so we'll see you back here real soon. Any advice and information in this podcast is general only and has been prepared without taking into account your particular circumstances and needs. For tailored, individualized advice, please consult with a qualified professional.